Hey y'all, this is Brown at IF Brown, and today we're going to be talking about Bloodlines, an Agusto Zidarov novel by Chris Wraight. So this takes place within the setting of Warhammer 40k, which is oftentimes a setting that is an amalgamation of military science fiction, horror, and maybe a little bit of fantasy thrown in for good measure, but set in the far future. And it's a very grim setting, and oftentimes in comparison to, say, Star Wars and Star Trek, which tend to be more idealistic, the Warhammer setting is something wherein cynicism is sort of the mentality that runs the setting and rules the day. And so that's not to say that good things don't happen, but it's just that oftentimes when they do happen, there's a sort of flip side to it, like or it's undercut by something tragic or negative happening, that makes it to where, okay, even though something good happened here, we still have to contend with all these other things, that kind of thing. But every now and then good does win out. And so when I found out that they were putting out a crime drama or a detective story set in the universe of Warhammer 40k, I was intrigued. And Chris Wright's actually a pretty good writer. I've read some of his stuff along the lines of what he's done for Warhammer 40k, and I figured, okay, hey, take a shot and check it out. And so I think I even used a gift card to get this. So there you go. But anyway, the character of Agusto Zidarov, I'm not 100% sure if this is his first appearance, but I get the impression that it is. But if anyone who's checking out this review knows otherwise, please let me know and I'll make the correction here. But anyway, Agusto Zidarov is a veteran inquisitor, and inquisitors are basically like, okay, you take a literal inquisitor from, the time of the Spanish Inquisition, but have them be essentially one-man detective armies, that kind of thing. Like they have carte blanche on what to do when it comes to, say, interrogating suspects, initiating hunts, that kind of thing. And so they've got a lot of power within the setting. But one of the things I liked about this particular novel is that you get kind of a humanized look at what it is to be an inquisitor, and it's something that takes a toll, on the character in question, But at the same time, they're just as determined to do their job as your everyday run-of-the-mill Imperial Guard troop, and so I appreciate the fact that while we understood, why the Inquisitors, were so feared, because they have so much access to, information and technology, and are given a lot of authority in what they, do. I felt like it was nice to see that this guy, he was an ordinary human, albeit somewhat enhanced, when it comes to, say, some form of mechanics, and he's, got a wife that he goes home to, and also just that he's respected in his field, and he has a camaraderie and what have you. And so even though this is like a grim, morally gray setting, this character was someone who was trying to go against the odds and fight within the system to try and do the right thing. And so I actually appreciated that. And also it was cool seeing what it was like to be a quote unquote ordinary citizen within a Hive city, and in this case the city is called Varangantua. Yeah, some of these names are kind of hard to pronounce, but if this is your first time, like, say, reading something set in the world of Warhammer 40k, the description they give of the city, Varangantua, which is like a hive city, gives you an idea of what the majority of the citizens of the Imperium have to contend with if they're in an urban environment. And it is not pretty. But anyway, so the story kicks off wherein Agusto Zidarov is called to take on a missing persons case, and this particular individual was a member of a very influential and wealthy family within Varangantua, and so so naturally, I mean, there's a lot of priority given to this assignment, but he's kind of confused as to why they want him to take the job, because yeah, he's done missing persons before, but usually it's gang related or crime syndicate stuff that he works on, as opposed to say straight up missing persons. And so nonetheless, he takes the case, and he finds out that this individual was mixed up in some shady business, and one of these quote unquote business ventures was a process of draining the life essence and nutrients and blood of young individuals, so that those in power who are 9 times out of 10 significantly older are given forms of rejuvenation treatment using the life force of younger individuals. So it's kind of like a capitalist form of vampirism, I guess. But so yeah, he finds out that this missing person was mixed up in this really nasty business, and he's basically having to kind of try and fight within the system as much as he can. But unfortunately, a lot of the people involved in this nasty business have a lot of power and sway in the city. And in fact, the branch of the authorities that Zidarov is affiliated with, unfortunately, has a lot of ties to the people in question as well. And so there's not a lot they can do as far as autonomy goes, even though usually they are autonomous and they have a lot of pull as far as what they can do within the Inquisition. But unfortunately, this is a case where it's like it starts off as a simple missing persons assignment, and then it keeps on getting more and more complex. I mean, it's one thing to find out this guy was involved in this nasty business, which is very much frowned upon, but unfortunately there's a very high demand amongst the upper echelon of society. And so because of that, there's a lot of stonewalling, a lot of red tape, and unfortunately there's quite a bit of homicide involved, because once Zidarov starts getting too close to certain elements of this case, certain parties decide to basically make their displeasure known by killing some of his comrades in arms, or at the very least grievously injuring them. And so Zidarov is put in a position to where, he has to fight within the system as much as he can, but also he has to try and, fight outside of the system, to whatever extent they can. And it's not really easy for him because he's a much older individual. And, yes, he has access to, medical treatment and what have you, but the truth is he's just not the young man he used to be. And so, when he's putting himself into danger on a frequent basis, and it's starting to wear on his body, and then you have, the psychological toll that it starts to take on him because of, just how complex and, deeply entrenched, this particular case turns out to be, and, how many cages that ends up rattling, once he gets too close. But yeah, I thought that Bloodlines overall was a good crime novel, and I thought it was fascinating, seeing it from a more grounded perspective, from someone who's, more or less an ordinary person, but a couple of mechanical treatments aside, like there's a sort of a recording apparatus that's attached to one of it that's been surgically implanted into one of his eyes, and so there are some elements of say a cyborg within his character, minor in comparison to a lot of the other characters within the setting, but nonetheless that element is there. But but I liked how maybe him being an older individual, you have that sort of veteran feel to the character, and someone who's seen a lot of shit and put up with a lot of stuff that unfortunately goes unaddressed by other people, but because of his department they tend to go after the ones who are unreachable. But unfortunately this is a case where that's something that they have a lot more trouble with because of how connected certain parties are. And it was fascinating, seeing it from kind of like the ground level, what it's like to live in, a hive city. And so, when he's interviewing people, trying to get some information on the missing person, or maybe, people who were involved in some of these criminal activities, you kind of get a glimpse of, ordinary people who are, sort of living a repressive existence. And it's like kind of like 1984, but maybe with some more science fiction and horror involved, because of what people are pressured to report each other for and things like that. And but at the same time, there is an element of humanity whenever he interacts with these people, because you see that they're just ordinary people trying to get by in a very grim setting. But unfortunately, because of just how messed up this setting is, I mean, trying to have some form of happiness, I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge enough in just ordinary real life, but to be in a setting like this where everything's against you in a cosmic sense, I mean, that's even more difficult. So you have these moments where he connects with people, and so he's getting clues to this case, but at the same time the fact that we're getting to see him interact with people one-on-one and treat them as people. I mean, even though his reputation as an inquisitor comes with some degree of fear, and for good reason. But I also liked how when he's with his wife, I mean, the two of them care about each other, but I liked that you saw that there was some drama there, simply because it's like, hey, we have a daughter who's wanting to go into the military, like the Imperial Guard specifically, and she's wanting to go off world, and she's buying into all this propaganda. She's going to be doing the Emperor's will, but she's more than likely just going to get killed and be an anonymous death if she goes off world. But on the other hand, you got the daughter who's wanting to do just that. She's wanting to go off world for the Emperor's sake, which is humanity's version of God at this point. But you have this constant whenever they're together, there's a form of tension and arguing, because they're trying, Zidarov and his wife are trying to talk their daughter into say, hey, there's nothing wrong with going to the military, but I mean, there's a lot you can do here planet side. I mean, there's a lot of corruption that needs people like you, good people like you, who are young and they've got potential to take a stand against them, that kind of thing. But whereas here she could actually do some good and have an impact, whereas if she just goes off into another world to fight for the Imperium, odds are she's going to be killed just like that, that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of interesting back and forth as far as that goes. And so I can only imagine when it comes to say like family dynamics, I mean, it might be relatable to some people who have say someone who's wanting to go into the military during wartime and stuff like that, and there's some drama that can be kind of hit close to home, I guess, for some people. But also liked seeing Zidarov's interactions with some of his fellow law enforcement personnel, and a couple of them stood out more than others. But it was cool to see say a member of the Inquisition kind of in his element with others of his kind, as well as say those who are in law enforcement but who are say above him or below him. And a couple of these characters I thought were fascinating, because one of them was like a battle-hardened member of the guard, I think, and he ends up going with Zidarov a couple of times on a couple of assignments in regards to this missing persons case, but he initially comes across as someone who's shoot first, ask questions later, and he still is. But at the same time, when he and Zidarov are interacting with one another, there's a certain amount of intelligence that's displayed that surprises both Zidarov and the reader, as in myself, and so I liked little moments like that, because oftentimes when it comes to interacting with people, you don't always know what to expect. Like, you can't judge a book by its cover. I mean, yes, a lot of the stuff that you see on the cover are true, but then you see that so-and-so's actually smarter than they look, that kind of thing. But yeah, so you have some interesting interactions like that. And let's see, what else? Oh yeah, when it comes to say the big twist, which I won't spoil, I'll just simply say that it was a good one, and you at least understood why certain people were doing what they were doing, as far as say revenge schemes and what have you. But at the same time, you also see that a lot of tragedy came from their actions. And so it's like, on one hand there's this basically there's this black market form of vampirism going on, or medical vampirism going on, just so the upper echelon of society can party and do whatever they want for a few more years without visible signs of aging, but it's like their body's on the clock and they're constantly having to replenish their stuff. So you have that going on, which is bad enough, and because of their status, they can seldom be touched by those in law enforcement. But then on the other hand, when you have certain revelations come to light as to this missing persons case, you're kind of like, yeah, I can understand why so and so did what they did here, in comparison to say this medical form of vampirism that's so widespread, even though it's supposed to be illegal. So it's like you can at least understand why someone who isn't necessarily a good person could do something for revenge in this case. And so it's like even though you want the certain parties to be brought in, once their identities are revealed, you can at least understand their motives. Whereas the people who are involved in this medical vampirism thing, basically it's just like, no, this is just torture. It needs to be stopped, and the people who have profited from it need to be held accountable. That kind of thing. And so, all in all, I thought this was a good novel. I will say though that the two downsides I can think of. I mean, I guess technically three, in a sense that there's a lot of familiar territory here, even though this is a Warhammer crime novel. But if you've read crime novels in the past or watched crime dramas, like whether it be movies or TV, you could probably pick up on a lot of things that have been done before. And I'm not saying that in itself is a bad thing, but at the same time, if say for instance you're wanting to read a straight up Warhammer oriented crime drama, I mean, yes, you're going to get a good one here, but just bear in mind that there's a lot of elements that you'll probably have seen in other works of fiction. And so, I mean, for me, that wasn't a problem, because to be frank, every form of fiction borrows from something else, that kind of thing. And so it's just a fact. So that didn't really bother me. But if it's your first time reading a Warhammer, or if it's your first time reading a crime drama within the setting of Warhammer 40K, that might, sort of, I don't know. It's just like some people like it, some people don't, like, as far as that particular aspect goes. But for me, it wasn't a problem. But one of the main things was that there's a lot of slang and dialogue and vocabulary within the setting of this novel that honestly I had a hard time understanding. Like, don't get me wrong, it's like it was in English and everything, but there were words that were used on a frequent basis that I was having to backtrack and figure out, okay, what did this mean? What did that mean? That kind of thing. Simply because, on one hand, Chris Wright does a good job of immersing you in the setting of this Hive city and the culture and what have you. But at the same time, though, I guess it may have helped in my case if I had read more Warhammer novels that were set in the quote-unquote present. Because, I mean, most of my experience with Warhammer 40K comes from, say, either the Horus Heresy or the Kyphus Cain books. And so I understood some of the dialogue as to what certain things were being referred to, but at the same time, there was a lot that I didn't understand. And to be fair, there is a glossary or an index, and it's give me a sec. Yeah, it's a glossary. You got a bunch of slang and their definitions, and so yeah, I mean, there is that. And to be fair, I didn't get to that until I finished reading the book. So maybe if the people who put this book together, which by the way, it's a very nicely produced book, good artwork, very sleek and polished in terms of how it's physically put together. But maybe if the people who were in charge of putting this book together, maybe if they had put the glossary or what have you at the front of the book, then okay, that way it'd be easier and more apparent that, hey, here's something to help the reader out as far as figuring out what certain words meant or what certain slang meant, that kind of thing. And so that took me out of it a few times. The other thing is that, for me at least, there were a lot of names to keep track of. And that's to be expected when it comes to, say, a far-reaching crime drama. But at the same time, I guess maybe because of how alien some of the names sounded, because, I mean, it is on another planet after all, and it's far in the future. There's an unfamiliar element to these names, to where, other than Zidarov, I had a hard time keeping track of who was who. Like, okay, obviously I knew his wife was his wife, but at the same time, I oftentimes got her name mixed up with another character, and so on and so forth, as well as, certain members of, law enforcement that I interacted with, that kind of thing. And so there was a lot of, me going back to certain, parts in the book, trying to figure out, okay, who was so-and-so and what was their involvement in this, blah, 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 blah. And so I'm not going to say, these factors ruined the book or anything like that, because this is still a good book. It's a good crime drama, and it was a very unique story. It was cool to, or let me phrase that. It was cool to have, a unique story like this, within, the setting of Warhammer 40K. And I'm definitely all for, checking out more of Agusto Zidarov's, further adventures if there are any. I'm just saying though that it was difficult to keep track of, who was who, as well as, what words meant what. So, like, for example, I'll just give you an example of something that could have, helped. But like in the Horus Heresy novels, 9 times out of 10, at the beginning of the book, there's this little index that shows, or like a cast of characters. Like there's, who are the, who's in, such and such legion, who's in Mechanicum, and so on and so forth. So at the very least, I mean, yes, there's a lot of names to keep track of, but you can actually, there is a specific section within the book that you can, backtrack to look at and say, okay, that's who so-and-so is. But unfortunately, there's nothing like that, within Bloodlines, as far as a character sheet at the beginning, which would have helped immensely, at least for me. And like I said, I mean, at least they do have a glossary at the back, but it would have been nice if that had been at the front. So you're like, okay, I can just, poof, go over there. The other thing is that, while I know that this is a Warhammer 40k novel because, well, Warhammer 40k, and you got Chris Wraight, who's frequently written for Warhammer 40k, and so there's a familiar feel to it. It didn't exactly, like, okay, I mean, don't get me wrong, like, there was definitely dialogue referring to elements of the Warhammer 40k universe, but in and of itself, it didn't exclusively feel like a Warhammer 40k novel. I mean, it felt like, say, a dystopian, cyberpunk crime novel, which, I mean, this definitely is, but it felt like something that could have been anywhere. Like, it could have been Earth, far in the future, and, things had gotten, so, repressive and, that kind of thing. Or it could have been on another planet altogether that, that just happened to be a setting of it. It didn't have to be tied to Warhammer 40k in any way. And so, reading it, it didn't really feel like it was set within the world of Warhammer 40k. Like, there were definitely some, shout outs to, certain things that had happened within the setting. And there's just enough dialogue given to show that, okay, yes, you got these Inquisitors in this section, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, okay, elements, within the setting are referred to establish that, okay, this does take place in the setting of Warhammer 40k. But at the same time, though, having read some of the stuff from Warhammer 40k and having read this novel and comparing all that, I mean, it really just, to me at least, it didn't feel exclusively like Warhammer 40k. I mean, it was a good, dystopian cyberpunk crime novel. I mean, make no mistake. And I like, the main character, and I definitely want to see more adventures with him. But I just think that, there could have been more done to maybe make the book stand out more in terms of how it's set within, Warhammer 40k. So none of these, factors necessarily, prevented my enjoyment of the book, but at the same time, I just, was thinking that, in some respects, they could have cleared some stuff up, or, they could have, made it they could have made it feel more like it was actually a part of that universe, as opposed to, say, you just gotta take the cover at its word, that kind of thing, and maybe having a few bits of minor dialogue, but other than that, though, other than those, factors, I mean, I liked the novel, Bloodlines. It was good. I'm gonna go ahead and give it, 4 out of 5 stars too, and yeah, I just it was a good introduction to, say, the character, for me at least. Like I said, I don't know if he's been in other works before, but it was, for me, a good introduction to the character of Agusto Zidarov, and it was cool seeing it from the perspective of someone in law enforcement, that kind of world and what have you, and I like the twists and turns. I just wish that it had actually felt like something that was a part of the setting it was supposed to be in. So all in all, it was a good novel. If you like crime dramas and you like Warhammer 40k, definitely check out Bloodlines. It's a good book. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, please drop a line, let me know. If you like what you see here, please feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care. Bye.